Hi, my name is Rachael Rounds. I am the Business Connections Program Manager at VCU RRTC. We are a supported and customized employment program where we help individuals with disabilities locate and maintain employment. And one of the things that we find ourselves working with companies on is some of their recruitment strategies for hiring individuals with disabilities. So we're going to go over a couple of topics that might be of interest to you, some things to think about when you are looking at your recruitment strategies for increasing your diverse labor force. So to get started, there really needs to be a commitment, and we would like to see that commitment start from the top down. So there should be those building blocks in place, and so buy-in at all levels of the company is how we're going to see success in the recruitment and hiring of individuals with disabilities. It's good practice to include disability in all company hiring initiatives and ensure that all individuals involved in the hiring process, from the people who post the positions to the people who make employment offers, it's making sure that they all know what the hiring initiative entails. And then we want to establish targeted recruitment, and you can do this in several ways. You can reach out to your state's vocational rehabilitation agency. They work with individuals with disabilities who are looking for employment, and it's a voluntary program. So these are all individuals who are highly motivated to locate employment. You can connect with local universities like VCU and their offices of disability services. And there will be all kinds of community partners, at least hopefully. There are a lot of different community partners in your area who serve individuals with disabilities, who are talented and skilled and are looking for employment. And then we kind of want to move into your accommodations policy. There should be easily accessible accommodation policy online, or that can be easily requested. For example, the last time I looked, I quickly went to VCU's website and I typed in just accommodations policy into the search bar. And this was kind of mid-COVID. So the first thing that popped up was related to COVID, as that's what was dominating our lives at the time. But the second link had the information for students and employees. And then that was broken down into things like getting around campus, alerts, resources for students and employees, library resources, policies, just the way it was just broken down pretty easily for individuals to understand what the different policies were. So, and it was really specific to VCUs. So if you are looking at updating your accommodations policy, you really want to obviously tailor it to your business. The policy should lay out a clear process for requesting accommodations. What is the process that somebody needs to go through to request an accommodation? Do they go to their immediate supervisor, or is there somebody in HR? Are there multiple versions, such as paper application, an application in Braille? Is it okay for somebody to review this this accommodation request with another employee or with their HR manager? So just kind of some things to think about when it comes to, you may have an accommodations policy, but how easy is it for somebody to access, and are there different ways that they can access it? And then when we think about the application and screening process, online applications, they really can be difficult for some people, but this is kind of the world that we live in right now. We live in an electronic time. So how can we work around this to accommodate individuals with disabilities? And I have just a quick story about kind of how this is a struggle for some people. It's not only difficult for some job seekers, but it's difficult for businesses too, or those individuals who are at the HR level who have goals of hiring individuals with disabilities. but are finding that they can't reach the target population that they're looking for. So here's just a quick example of that. About 2 years ago or so, I met with some HR professionals for a city, and they were tasked with increasing the hiring of individuals with disabilities and veterans. And as we got to talking, one of the women said, people with disabilities and veterans have such a hard time penetrating our application system. And that's a major issue when it's HR's goal to hire people with disabilities and vets, and they can't figure out how to do that. So I said, do you think we can change the application process to accommodate your targeted demographic? And they told me that I would have to speak to the mayor's office, and gave me the phone number and email for his assistant. And I called and emailed several times, hoping to actually get in front of the mayor to discuss this issue and address how we could help tap into their untapped talent pool. And after trying for several months, I was never able to get into his office or anyone's office, or anybody that worked for him, for that matter. So this is just an example of the issue needing to be a top-down issue. And I'm sure that diversity and inclusion is important to the mayor, and I'm sure he had many, many issues he needs to tackle on a day-to-day basis, but the people underneath him may not have known that diversity is a major concern of his, or that I could have been the person to help address that concern. So they may have just screened me out as not being at the top of the priority list. So it's not just a frustration for individuals with disabilities, it's a frustration for companies. And so I keep coming back to that buy-in from the top down, and then I think that's how we make systems changes. So we also find things like that personality assessment can be pretty grueling at times. And really, when you think about it, are they accurate? Do we answer the way that we think employers want us to answer? Are we being truthful? And I have another example of this as well. I worked with a young man with autism, and so with that, his thinking was very black and white. And he wanted to answer the questions truthfully. So when the question popped up, do you prefer working in a group or do you like to be around people? His honest answer is no, but really he could do it. He just didn't necessarily prefer to work that way. So when I explained to him the importance of being a team member and why we might want to answer the question differently, he wanted to stop the application because he felt he was being dishonest. So, I mean, if we're being honest, would he have been immediately screened out because of his answers? So I actually was given a printout one time from an employer of the responses to all of the questions that they were looking for on their personality assessment. And the answers that they were looking for were all either strongly agree or all either strongly disagree. And we don't necessarily always fall on one end of the spectrum or the other. We may have some in-between feelings about some of these things. So did that just screen us out if we kind of fall in the middle of that spectrum? So it's just something to think about. And then when we get to talking about training recruiters, it's important to make sure that all recruiters are trained and comfortable talking about the following topics. So comfort with disability. People can be uncomfortable talking about topics that they don't know a lot about. And unless you live with the person with a disability or you really know people with disabilities, you may feel uneasy talking about disability. There's a lot of training out there that is geared toward working with individuals with disabilities that can help you increase your comfort level or help your recruiters increase their comfort level on the topic. For instance, VCU has several free webcasts that you can tap into on this topic. Accessible applications. Recruiters should know the answer to, can I get this application in Braille? Or is there a paper application I can fill out? in this day and age, everyone is just so used to completing applications on the computer, but what if an applicant lives in a rural area and they have spotty internet? Or what if they live below the poverty line and can't afford to pay for internet? Are there accessible options for individuals in these situations? We kind of touched on accommodation policy already. Is the accommodation policy easily accessible, and does the recruiter know where it is and how to direct somebody to it? And then interviewing candidates with interviewing candidates with disabilities. We could really get creative in this area, and we're going to touch on this in another slide. So let's talk about the communication about hiring initiatives when you're looking to hire individuals with disability. Information and language regarding diversity, inclusion, and disability should be on your website. Employee resource groups are great at getting information out to the public. Any recruiting brochures, social media, other marketing material, that should all highlight any hiring initiatives that you have for individuals with disabilities. And here's just an important point to think about that people don't always think about. Inviting current employees with disabilities into the conversation can just provide invaluable insight about the information that should be out there. So many of those employees have lived their entire lives with disabilities, and they know what kind of information they're looking for when they're trying to navigate the work world. So if you know of an individual in your company who has a disability, bringing them into the conversation about what should be in the marketing materials, how should an application look, or how would it be more accessible to somebody with different disabilities? So people don't always think about, tapping into their current workforce. And then, we just talked about this with the recruiting brochures highlighting the initiatives and then inviting current employees into the conversation. And so another thing to think about when you're talking about recruiting individuals with disabilities is connecting with community partners. And you may already be doing this. Career fairs, a lot of companies do career fairs, but there's also vocational rehabilitation agencies. In Virginia, that's the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services and the Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired. But each state has their own VR agency, and they may be called something a little different, but it's usually some variation of, it's going to have VR in it likely for vocational rehabilitation. Again, career fairs are a great way to do community outreach. Educational institutions and their disability service offices, they, at larger universities, you could have thousands of people getting degrees who may have a disability but may fit really well within your company. And then technical training programs. In Virginia, we have what's called Wilson Workforce, and they work in tandem with our VR agency. And they provide several training programs just across the board in lots of different areas. And the participants who go through these technical programs often leave the training programs with certificates in the areas where they were trained. So these are just a few examples of the community partners who could be in your area that you could tap into to increase your hiring of individuals with disabilities. Here's what I find to be kind of an exciting creative part when we're talking about interviewing individuals with disabilities. So you might want to broaden your thinking a little bit outside of the typical question and answer format, maybe a panel. You can adjust your approach if you need to when you're talking about interviewing an individual with a disability. So just some examples of that would be to consider a working interview. This allows the prospective employee and the employer to see the applicant in action. Some people with disabilities, they're not going to do well in a traditional interview. So allowing them to perform tasks for an hour or two will allow the job seeker to determine if the job is what they thought it was. And it'll allow the employer to see if the applicant is capable of doing a job with or without a job coach. Another way that we could do instead of just handing in a paper resume, we could potentially hand in a visual resume, which could have videos of an individual performing a task. So you could be really creative in these areas. And then allowing a job coach to be present is really useful for a lot of individuals with disabilities. They can sometimes assist with rephrasing questions if necessary. We find that this helps some people with processing deficits if they don't understand the questions that are being asked. And it's not that they can't give you an appropriate answer, they just might need it asked a little differently. And then allowing for processing time. And then this one's kind of a fun one that I don't know that a lot of people do, but I have seen it happening more and more lately, kind of the walking and talking interview. I mean, just an example, I help people with I help people find jobs, I help train them on how to interview and prep them for possible questions. And yet when I sit down, and I've been doing this for a long time, when I sit down to interview, I'm still kind of a nervous wreck. So for me personally, I think I would feel a lot more at ease if I was getting a tour of the facility and having a more casual conversation, as opposed to more like one or more people just staring at me, waiting for my responses. And I think you probably get a better picture of a person when you're in a less stressful situation. So the walking and talking method just provides a more comfortable situation for the applicant to also ask questions of the employer. And then we want to also just ensure that the interview is accessible, and don't be afraid to ask the applicant if they need an application before the interview. And that's not always, I think people think about individuals who use wheelchairs, you know, they think, okay, do we need an elevator? Do we need stairs? But somebody, again, an accommodation could be a job coach that could just rephrase some questions, or you might need to hire an interpreter. So just being open to asking those questions and kind of rethinking the way that you do a traditional interview could be really useful when you come to interview an individual with a disability. So this was kind of a short presentation on these, but some of the takeaways that I want you to think about are, how do you feel your company is doing with making sure that that they know your commitment to hiring with individuals with disabilities? And are the methods, are there other methods of getting the word out there? Are you familiar with the accommodation policy and where to find it? And do you think someone outside of the HR world could easily access it, sorry. And then just some other, what are your thoughts on your current application and screening process? Can that be tweaked? Can that be made more accessible for individuals with disabilities? And how can you continue to reach out to community partners for recruiting individuals with disabilities? And can you think of other creative ways to customize the interview process for people with disabilities? So I know this was a quick, short little pop of information, but I think some of the things that we hit on are easy fixes, and you could tweak your processes. Thinking about buy-in from the top down, are your presidents, are your vice presidents, are your owners open to discussions about hiring individuals with disabilities, and how can you be a champion for that kind of process? So thank you for your time for watching this webcast. And if you have any questions about what was discussed today, you can post your questions in the question board that will be available to you.